Great, thank you. All right, well, thank y'all for having myself and my co-presenters for this UTIG discussion hour. We are going to be telling you about a program that kicked off last summer that's hosted in the Jackson School and relies mostly on participation from folks really volunteering their time, like y'all, to run it. It's called the Research Traineeship Experience, and last summer it had a specific theme that was called GeoVISION, but broadly it's called the Research Traineeship Experience, or the RTX. And I'll give a brief overview of what the program is, how it ran last year, which it'll run pretty much the same way this year. And then we have with us today two kind of mentor pairs, and one of those mentors also led what's called a training module that I'll tell y'all about. So try to give y'all a flavor of the experience that you can have if you want to get involved this summer. And I will go ahead and take it away. And please feel free to ask questions in the chat. If I don't see it right away, just even if I'm in the middle of talking, you can put it in there and I'll get to it when I take a pause. And now somebody tell me, where do I don't know how to present from Google Slides, actually. There it is. Zoom photos, we're blocking it. All right. So the GeoVision Research Traineeship Experience.
We don't see your screen anymore now.
Okay. Well, are y'all cool with just having it like this? Okay, thanks.
We actually don't see your screen at all, or I don't at least see your screen.
No, you're right. It went away. It said it stopped. It must not have, like, switching back and forth. So we'll go like this. Okay, thanks. So this summer 2020 RTX was themed GeoVision, which stood for Geosciences, Visualization, Imaging, Simulation in Online Networks. And we really, tried to take advantage of the virtual nature and encourage people to participate who had ideas about how to create an educational experience for students that focused on sort of data analytics or any kind of programming skills, techniques that involve, using remote learning options like using your computer rather than needing to rely on the lab or the field. So GeoVision is motivated by our desire in the Jackson School to support future geoscientists, particularly those who are from backgrounds that are underrepresented in STEM and in geoscience. And so through this program, which supports undergraduate researchers over the summer, the goal was to support a cohort of diverse trainees who will become more qualified and competitive grad school applicants. They will develop technical skills to leverage beyond the summer for more extensive research experiences. And we wanted to help these participants experience the research process firsthand. So the students who participate in this program are called trainees, and they're undergraduates or recently graduated undergraduate students. Most of them, the 20 out of 23 students who participated last year, are GeoForce alumni. And most of the students attended universities other than UT Austin. So the goal of the RTX is really to kind of create a way for Jackson School researchers, including postdoctoral scholars, research scientists, graduate students, and faculty, to engage with diverse geoscience students in ways that you might not be able to kind of by your typical day-to-day activities. So the RTX consists of several different elements that the trainees participate in. It's sort of a hybrid of a traditional REU or NSF research experience for undergraduates. But then we build on top of this skill building opportunities for the students through what we call training modules. And these are anywhere from kind of a 2-hour demo or demo or tutorial of a technique like X-ray computed tomography scanning. We had Dr. Jesse Maizano give some really cool demos of that, to longer short courses. And one of our short courses, Tim will tell us a little bit about that later. The cohort of students is also supported together by professional development and training workshops that we do twice a week. And those are with me. So research shows that when students participate in undergraduate research or activities like this in a group, kind of as a supported cohort, then they get more out of it. They do better. So we cover topics from, research skills like reading scientific literature to more capacity building interpersonal techniques such as conflict resolution and coping skills. And then we tried to, build that camaraderie that usually comes with in-person activities. We had social nights, like trivia competitions that Sophie Goluber helped with, and we had a Google Earth scavenger hunt that an undergraduate helped design, movie night. So we try to have those social activities in there too. On top of this, so all of the participants of the RTX do these three things: the training modules, the workshops on professional development, and the social activities. And then the learners, so there's two tiers of participation. The students who are learners do what are called research rotations. And this was an element that I think was really successful. And it's a way that people can participate in the RTX if at kind of a low time commitment. So in these research rotations, learners were welcomed into JSG research groups virtually, and they got to just participate in the meetings, sort of see how a research group operates, learn what the different members are of a lab group or a research group, what their roles are, see that there are graduate students in more environmentally focused groups that come from a biology background or a chemistry background. And we had students participating as trainees who were in allied STEM fields. So that was really eye-opening for them to see, I could still go into grad school in geoscience, even though I'm not majoring in geology. The researchers are participating in a guided independent research project. And this is, this is an added element, sort of requires more time for them. There's more commitment and a bit more, seriousness to the program. And we have our mentors here today to talk about the experience that they went through for mentoring a student. So just to give you an idea of how they kind of wrapped up their experience, the trainees, the researchers we had a really nice 2-day symposium of final presentations in which each student gave a 12-minute oral presentation. I asked, one of the ways to make sure that they're really generating something themselves is just to measure it by saying 2 unique figures. We didn't get to this final product last year, an outline of a grad student fellowship proposal, and that's all right. It was our first time doing it, but that's something we could still consider for this summer. And then all of the learners gave a report to me on sort of the highlights of that rotation experience, the research rotation experience. So they're reflecting throughout the program on what they're getting out of each of these experiences that they have. And all the trainees created a narrative of their path through STEM that extended into ambitions. And I asked for each of them to think about how they wanted to transfer the experience they had in the RTX in GeoVISION into going back to their home institution. So again, most of these students were from other universities like UTSA, Texas Tech, University of Houston, Texas A&M. So we wanted them to think to not just have the RTX exist in isolation. And I've kept in touch with the students over this year, and a lot of them have said, like, man, the reading research articles really helped me with my physics lab this year, or the geostatistics really helped me with my probability class. So we're happy to hear those kinds of things. This finally is just to give you an idea of what the students are doing each day. So this is a very generalized weekly schedule. It's a combination of synchronous and asynchronous, depending on the choice of the instructor of a training module. So 1 week, we were having instruction in the mornings with one of our training modules. And then I tell them to take a break. But then a lot of it is their personal, needing to manage their time, just like an undergraduate researcher you may have during the year, or just as a graduate student does. They're doing their research and independent work. And then we have those twice a week workshops. We also make sure that each student in the cohort has a weekly check-in with either myself or another program staff to kind of see how they're doing. And one of the things we want to add on this year is to do more frequent check-ins with our mentors themselves, provide some more support for our mentors this year. So that's the overview of sort of the program at large. And then we're going to hear about the ways that our other presenters this year or today were involved last summer, so you can get an idea of how you can be involved this summer. So y'all just tell me when you want me to change the slide, Michelle.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, so I'm Michelle, and I was a graduate student mentor last summer. And so this was the summer of 2020 was the summer right after my first year of grad school. And so if you're thinking about doing it as a graduate student, I think it's really important to know, like, what are you actually going to do? And so the first thing I did was I came up with a project idea and compiled papers for my student to read and look over. And this was a project I had already kind of been thinking about a little bit. So it was really helpful, and I thought it worked really well with an undergrad student to work on. And then throughout the summer, I met with the GeoVISION student on a weekly basis. I think we met every Friday for like an hour or so. Sometimes we would get like really into the science and talk for a little bit longer than an hour. And we would talk over the papers that I had sent him earlier on. So the first few weeks, we would just kind of be talking about the background of the project and like the first steps he was going to be taking. And then after that, it sort of changed into, what he was actually doing with the project every week, checking in with that, as well as kind of it branched out once we had sort of like gotten to know each other a little bit, talking more about grad school and like what research life is like and all that stuff. And then finally, I started looking over his deliverables, looked over his final presentation. We had practiced a couple times because he did have to give that 12-minute presentation. And they also presented in our own lab group with Tim's lab group as well. You can change it, Dana.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah, and so that was what I did, and I thought I really enjoyed it, obviously. I felt like it was a really great way of like checking in with the student every week, and I felt like it was a great amount of time. I spent that summer kind of like working on a manuscript, so it was a really great thing to kind of do and take a break from writing for a little bit. And so what I overall got out of the experience, so that was my first time mentoring a student through a project. And that was like a little bit intimidating as a first year graduate student, because I had been on the other side of it. I had been that undergrad for a couple of years, and I was like, oh no, and now I have to come up with a project and like sort of be that mentor. So it was my first time doing that. And obviously this is going to be something I'm going to do in the future as a researcher. So it was really great to get that first experience there. And also I learned more about my own work in general. I kind of have this story where after I had given my student a bunch of papers to read, I had said, ask a bunch of questions. And he had sent me an email with a ton of questions, and I went through and answered all his questions. And that was probably like one of the highlights, I think, of the experience, besides actually talking with the student, was like kind of going through and being like, oh, hey, I actually don't know the answer to that. And then I would go and look at it. And I learned I didn't actually know as much as I thought I did about the project, but it was really great because then I like included all these links and stuff like, oh, how does cryovolcanism work? I don't like totally know, but I have like this cool GIF of cryovolcanism sort of deal, which was a lot of fun. And I also got to work and learn about this project I was interested in that didn't like totally have a ton to do with my actual like project I had been working on for my graduate research, but I kind of got to dip my foot in the water with this a little bit and work with a student on that, which was really cool and neat. And I just really enjoyed the experience in general. I really liked getting to know the student, like I said, towards the end of the mentorship, just talking about kind of life in general, which was really great. So yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Michelle.
Yancy. Okay, cool. So my involvement was leading a short course, one of the short courses that Dana mentioned, and then also a bunch of my group members. I sort of sent out a call to all my group to see if anybody wanted to help and mentor a student, and a bunch of people did. So 2 postdocs and 3 grad students from my group all mentored students. And so for the short course, it was 4 days in the afternoon. So it was like kind of 2.5 hours, if I'm recalling correctly, a day. And it was a short course on remote sensing basics, and with the final day being sort of more like a lab assignment on how to use Google Earth for making some basic measurements of the Earth's surface or the surface of different planetary bodies. And that worked really well with the sort of theme of GeoVision because it's remote, so everybody can do it. There, I guess, were a few technical challenges of getting everyone up to speed with like getting Google Earth installed and having the right tech requirements for that, but we worked through that no problem. Like Dana and her team were a huge help making sure all the students had everything they needed for that. It was directly adapted from the remote sensing course I normally teach. So I sort of just culled down material from what I normally teach to teach to these students and just give them sort of like a bit of a flavor of what we normally talk about in a remote sensing class. So just sort of a primer, which people seem to enjoy. And then in terms of what else, where else I actually committed my time. So with my group members who were mentoring students, I sort of helped them initially come up with some project ideas. It was mostly their own project ideas. A lot of sort of where my input was about scope, because like the project or the program is what, eight weeks, of which 6 weeks are really dedicated to research, which goes by super quick. And so like something that's very finite and tractable, just coming up with what that looks like. And then I met with each sort of, I was pretty hands-off in terms of the approach. So I met with each mentor-mentee pair. I sort of like popped into their one-on-one meetings. They were all having one-on-one weekly meetings, and I popped in maybe like 2 or 3 times over the summer, depending. So if you go to the next slide. So I have the same sort of format. So what did I get out of this? Well, it was a really, for the short course, it's actually a really nice way to sort of reevaluate my remote sensing class and see how I could boil it down into essentially 4 lectures. Like, what would I want students to get if they had 4 lectures? And some of the Google Earth stuff I developed was new. And so that actually is like a super useful thing that I developed from this. And it was just a lot of fun. Students were super eager. Some had heard of remote sensing, some had like not even heard of it, but kind of knew what Google Earth or Google Maps was. And so that was a lot of fun. It was also, like, from my perspective, a super awesome opportunity, as Michelle said, for members of my group to like get it, like hands-on experience mentoring, and also make some actual progress on interesting side projects. So one of the projects was presented as a poster at GSA. So the GeoVision's mentee presented her work, and I know she's been applying to graduate schools, and she's still been talking with the postdoc in my group who was her mentor. And I'd actually be curious, Dana, do you know how many of the GeoVision's participants are applying to graduate school?
I don't know how many total, actually. I know that 2 of them applied to the Jackson School. I'd have to ask how many total. Yeah, I don't, but
I know they were sort of all a range of career
was
stages too.
Years, but 2 out of the however many seniors there were, I think there were only like 4 or 5 seniors. Right. So yeah.
Cool. And yeah, another one was sort of some of the initial results are being worked into an ongoing research project. So another like sort of great outcome. And then it's also, as Dana said, it's cool to get involved with students not at UT. I think that's actually maybe I think you know, I'm grasping at straws for like silver linings of the past year, but one of them is definitely that communication remotely is easier than we had previously chalked it up to be. And I think that will benefit us moving forward. And so being able to really effectively and easily have remote internships was really cool. Yeah, so that's all I had to say.
Thanks. I thought of a third one who I know applied to grad school this year too.
Cool.
Okay, well, I will stop share so that Dan and Evan can take over.
Sounds good. 1 second. Oop. All right. Okay, sweet. Yeah, thank you, Dana, for organizing this. It's really fun for me to blather on about what I think is was a very enjoyable experience for me last summer, especially during COVID, which obviously has been less than positive. But yeah, so I'll briefly walk you through the work that Jada, Dan, and I undertook. Ooh, there's a timer on this. Oops. But anyway, so Jada is an undergrad, a chemistry undergrad at Texas Women's University, and I actually had the privilege of getting to know her a few years prior to the GeoVISION program because I've been involved with GeoForce, and she was a counselor on a trip that I was an educational coach for. So I was on the educational team, and I got to know her through that. And what was really fun was working with her and knowing that she doesn't have a traditional geoscience background, and through this 8-week project, seeing her become more comfortable with geology, applying her knowledge, and doing some really cool stuff. And so her project overall was focusing on the environmental controls of silicate weathering in volcanic catchments. And I'll go a little bit more into the details of the science than Michelle and Tim had done. But generally speaking, my research as a PhD student, so I focus on the carbon cycle, and my research has been focused on silicate weathering as it pertains to the carbon cycle in the modern and over geologic time. And one really powerful way of understanding the carbon cycle is by looking at the chemistry of rivers. And Dan, other members at UT and I have been starting to use lithium isotopes, which is prevailing as a really powerful proxy to understand silicate weathering. And so part of my PhD project has been compiling a global data set of river water lithium isotope, published lithium isotope data. And so all of these symbols correspond to all the catchments that or river water samples that I extracted. And during my PhD, I worked with a number of other people, and we determined the catchment properties and amassed this really big, gigantic data set that I've been combing through and trying to analyze on the global scale. And I figured that in going into, like, I really enjoy mentoring. I've always thought that time spent helping others has never detracted from my time on my own research. And so I was eager and zealous going into this opportunity. And I was beginning to think how I could distill down some of my broader scale research problems into smaller, little, more digestible bites that an undergrad who doesn't have any geoscience experience can go into. And so what we did was, and this was a project that Dan and I sort of came up together, how can we take this global data set, distill it down, and have someone really learn the fundamentals of silicate weathering and do research that would benefit all of us in our endeavors. And so what we ended up doing was selecting just a subset of these data, for which each of the catchments had a distinct and similar rock type. And then Jada compared the river water chemistry, which was previously published, with these drainage catchment properties. And so what we ended up doing was, over the course of each week, Dan, Jada, and I would meet for about an hour right at the beginning of the week. And in these meetings, we would talk, and especially early on, we talked about just the fundamentals of why exactly are we studying this problem, addressing some of the fundamental geoscience that Jada may not have been familiar with. And then, like Michelle, before going into the project, we ended up amassing a list of different papers of varying scopes, some of which were review papers, some of which were smaller, more tailored to the project at hand, and had Jada read them. And as the zealous and really motivated and upbeat person she is, she came with bajillions of questions at the beginning of each of our meetings, stemming from just the science to all things sort of in the general sphere of what we were studying. So she was the driver in lots of these meetings, coming equipped with just very basic questions, both pragmatic in terms of science, but then also fundamental in terms of the theory. And so it was just like a freewheeling conversation in lots of ways that we tried to funnel to the end about like, okay, well, what do we actually want to accomplish this week to meet the objectives of trying to compare catchment properties with river water chemistry? And so we would have these long conversations, cover lots of ground, and then establish weekly objectives. And then later in the week, Jada and I would meet for about an hour or two. And that was primarily focusing on helping her get through this weekly objective. And they're centered around building skills. So as Dana had mentioned, they took some short courses, one of which was in programming in Python, and another one was in geostatistics. So it was really helpful having those sort of templates, those courses, as sort of guidance and at least an introduction to some of the skills that Jada had developed in working with me. And so I helped her with some very basic programming issues. As we all know, programming can be a real bane. And then some statistical tools that would help us sort of quantify the significance of the relationships between catchment properties and river water chemistry. And so Jada and I in these meetings, so between these two meetings, actually, I forgot to mention, between this Monday and this Thursday, Jada would have all this time independently to work on problems and develop questions and sort of, it was her time to sort of go without my assistance. And then Thursday was the time for her to sort of present to me what she had done and for me to help her sort of accomplish what we thought was an objective or target. And of course, these are all fluid, these different objectives. And so over the course of the 8 weeks, we spent about half of the time basically just talking and reading and having really broad conversations about big geoscience problems, and then funneling it down, going, if we were thinking about science as an hourglass structure, we were basically just getting towards the middle of the hourglass, narrowing down the scope of the problem by the end of the 4 weeks. And at this point in time, Jada had developed really good vocabulary and was able to sort of talk like a geoscience graduate student, which was really great. And then once we got into the second half of the project, it was more about her sort of working on the project after we refined the scope of the project. And this was her independent research. And in lots of these meetings, she would have a bunch of plots. She'd just come with like 30 MATLAB plots, just go, okay. And then she would tell us what she thinks she was seeing. And then Dan and I would be like, yeah, I think you're kind of right. And Dan and I are wont to ramble and to talk a lot and have, we can ramble. So it ended up having this really organic sort of excited conversation, and Jada was keen on that as well. But anyway, we would sort of go through and sort of just get a sense of these large data sets, mostly motivated by Jada's questions and some of the interpretations that she was coming to in those in the time that she was working on those exercises. And then in the final 2 weeks, we sort of determined what the most important results were. And then we started to think, okay, now that we have these results, how can we think more broadly? And so and that's sort of where Dan, Jada, and I currently are. We're still talking about this project, and we're thinking about, well, how can this, because the results are important, and it's something that both Dan and I and others have been racking our heads around. But in addition to sort of finalizing the results, we spent a good amount of time, Dan and I, assisting her with the final presentation. And so having her develop the figures and develop a narrative, PowerPoint design, and then giving practice talks to us, and then her presenting in the final week of the program. And what's been really great is that this conversation hasn't stopped. So Jada's incredibly motivated. and has ended up turning in a GSA abstract, and she gave an oral presentation in a session, sort of sandwiched between two of the invited speakers. So I was just like the inner mentor me was just like so stoked about this opportunity for her, like, and I was so incredibly proud. And now she applied to graduate programs in geoscience and has been accepted to a few programs, and so I think she has a promising future. And she also has expressed interest in sort of participating in manuscript development. And so I would say that this whole experience has been really beneficial in lots of ways. And at a fundamental level, just having someone else participate in the geosciences was the biggest takeaway. But yeah, that's my rundown.
I don't have actually too much to add to this, but I will say just a few words. And the first thing I want to say is that I think I'll just reiterate what Tim says, is that in an 8-week program, there's not much time. And I think that a lot of people would agree that advisors almost always have expectations that seem at first unrealistic or maybe are unrealistic. And this helps you get calibrated in terms of like what is actually accomplishable in a 2-month period of time. And I've mentored a number of student summer projects for the REU program for students here at UT, and then for this GeoVISION program. And most of the work that I do, it involves collecting data and then interpreting it. And I actually really like the emphasis on just interpreting the data, because all the REU projects, they just ended up with the student collecting the data, and then that's just about all they had time to do. And so really, sure, you want to learn how to collect data and how to judge the quality of the data and all that stuff, but really the exciting part of science is interpreting the data. And so this kind of like this remote experience just sort of fast track that. It's like, no, you got to design a project where you're looking at existing data and you're just interpreting it. So that makes it really fun. And it's challenging to develop a project that is doable in 8 weeks. And so that's the challenge. If you want to be a mentor, that's the challenge. And you should start thinking about that as soon as possible, because you can't really develop the project while you're doing the mentoring. You got to have a pretty good idea. You can tweak it a little bit, but you got to have a good idea of what the project's going to be ahead of time, and a good idea that it's going to be successful if you want it to be a positive experience rather than a frustrating one. And then the other thing that I wanted to say is what I got out of it is just getting to know a person. And in Evan, in my case, it was a person who just has had a really difficult time over maybe the past 4 years or so at least. You can read about this stuff in the news, or things that people have written about it, but it's a different kind of thing when you actually talk to someone like this every day, or every week, and you get to know them and you get to hear about these experiences on a firsthand basis. And so far and away, really, my big takeaway from this was that personal connection. There's just no other way to get that. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Evan. Yeah. All good advice. I've heard before that a reasonable summer project for kind of an undergraduate might be something that would take you as an experienced researcher like 2 weeks, one to 2 weeks. So that sort of gives you the scale of like really condensing it down, and especially thinking about that you're mentoring them through, and Dan put this really well, like just the process of research too, like how you go from defining a question to looking at data and developing interpretations from it. So thank y'all for really stepping through the way you approached that process with Jada. Yeah. So I hope that there are questions. Before we jump into questions, I'll show everyone, let me put the website for the RTX into the chat. And it's mostly a student facing website, like a potential trainee mentee applicant website. So it describes the dates for this year, which are June 7th to August 4th. That sort of adds like a few days at the end for some wrap up, but it's about the same length as last year. And we'll have a final symposium again. Students have until April 1st to apply. So if y'all know any students who you'd like to share this opportunity with, please do share the link. And then if you're interested in being involved, either as a mentor, a rotation host, like a research rotation host and hosting students in your lab group meetings, or in leading a short course, you can just click this, I'm interested in being a mentor. And then I thought it would bring you down here, but you fill out, you can either email me, you can always just email me or Dr. Samuel Moore, or you can fill out this fairly short Qualtrics form, which is for me to just keep better track of folks who are interested. And I want to, emphasize again that we want to make this like a doable opportunity for you in terms of the amount of time you think you can dedicate to it. So these are kind of listed in like maybe increasing time commitments, where hosting trainees in your meetings, leading a tutorial or short course, and then mentoring a trainee through a project. But I'd love if anyone has any questions, either for me kind of on the program itself or for our mentors and instructors who are here. I am going to call out that we have Gail Christensen here too, who was really instrumental in GeoVISION last summer, having, whoops, she popped out. But having led, oh, there she is. Okay. Yeah. Having led a short course that was adapted from her very popular Python and geoscience research class. But does anybody have any questions or ideas? You want to float an idea for us about this summer, a way you want to be involved, and we can kind of give feedback on it?
So I have a question, Dana.
Yes.
So I saw you, sorry, I came in late. I was talking with a candidate. So you gave me some very nice feedback from the students about my short course.
Mm-hmm.
Have you gotten a feedback on their experience with the whole mentorship? And is there anything you can share about that?
Yeah. So we did, those weekly check-ins that we did with the students provided a lot of, I guess, what you could call kind of formative feedback throughout, like very frequent feedback, which was great. And it sort of helped with knowing if there were any challenges, which, we had one or two kind of mentor-mentee relationships that didn't meet our expectations, but that's going to happen, right? There's a lot of reasons that can happen, but I mean, it was overwhelmingly positive. Like the students, the feedback generally that everyone gave was like, this was, some of them have said life-changing, actually, like not to be dramatic or cliche, but they really have said that it totally changed their idea of their education. There's one engineering student added a geology minor to her degree. There's another student who's like thinking about different career paths. So the mentorship, I'm trying to think of if there was anything sort of specific. I mean, all of them seemed comfortable with going to their mentors with questions, which I think is a really good sign, and if they seemed like they were struggling, I would help them sort of figure out a way to maybe communicate that. And I'd like to do a better job this summer of sort of the other side of it too. So I only had organized one or two kind of mentor meetups, but I think we should have some more of those this summer so that mentors can chat with each other and so that mentors can tell me if they think anything isn't really aligning with what they were expecting or hoping for.
So one thing I would like to add, Danny made that comment about how students felt motivated to ask us questions,
Mhm.
and we're very forward. And so that was certainly the case with Jada. And I think that one thing I could attribute that to was our first meeting, which was totally informal. And I think you had given the students a list of questions to ask us, basically sort of giving, and that gave a, like, Dan and I gave biographical sketches of our education and our experiences, and even some of the pitfalls that we experience as along the way. And for me as a graduate student, some of the things that I've had to deal with. And I think that in having that conversation and sort of showcasing, just telling our stories, that enabled them to see the human sides of our experiences, one. And two, I think part of that conversation, beyond just the sort of the interview style and the anecdotes, was being really clear with the expectations. And so I think that's a conversation, and I mean, it's becoming more popular and commonplace, and I'm not sure if it's being widely adopted by professors. I think, Tim, you establish expectations with your graduate students, right? But so maybe you can elaborate on how you go about doing that. But my one just opinion is that I felt that that level of transparency and knowing what we expected on either side of the relationship, the mentor-mentee relationship, really allowed for us to grow and be honest with sort of the objectives that we placed and the targets that we sought to aim.
So just in terms of setting expectations, yeah, like my group has a handbook that we use that has like what I expect of students and what students can expect of me. And I don't think we have one for REU students specifically, but I think that would be of use, just like a couple of bullet points of what our expectations. Like as an example, what is a reasonable amount of time for answering an email, right? If you send me an email at 7 p.m. and it needs to be, and you would like an answer by 8 p.m., that's probably not going to happen. And that's an unreasonable expectation. But if you send me an email at 9 a.m. and it's something pressing and it's toward the end of the experience and you need an answer by the end of the day, that's kind of a reasonable expectation. So like things like that. I think having the deliverable, as you said, is like, that's sort of like the expectation. It's like, okay, at the end of this, you will have a 12-minute presentation on what you've been doing, where you go through background, context, methods, results, interpretations. That's the expectation.
Yeah.
I don't know, Michelle, if you want to.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, I know that as mentors, we got like a sheet of paper that was to help us, like to give to our student, like, here are the expectations. And like, I think it also, I don't really remember, I haven't looked at it since last summer, but I'm pretty sure it was like, you know, about the project and about us as well, and like what we expected of them. And so I feel like, and I think the undergrad also like filled that out and sent it to us. And then so like, I learned a lot about the undergrad I was working with from just that first week, just from reading his responses to that. And yeah, I think so, like, you know, there are resources provided to you as a mentor if you haven't done this before, to kind of like guide you along and set those expectations and stuff.
Good. I'm glad that those resources helped y'all.
One of the things that
go ahead.
I was just going to say, one of the things that I kind of lay out as an expectation when I'm mentoring students for the summer is that initially I expect them to ask a lot of questions, and I don't expect them to, to really make many decisions by themselves. But I do expect that as the summer goes on, that they start being comfortable making some of those decisions by themselves. I mean, that's just them learning and becoming confident in themselves. But it also, to some degree, protects you as a mentor from a student who just wants to barrage you with questions for the entire summer, right? So it kind of serves two purposes, and I think it's a good thing to just at the outset mention.
Yeah, I use with the students, and then also with the mentors, resources from the Center for Improving Mentored Experiences and Research, CIMR. And they have curricula for entering researchers. And that's where, for example, the mentor biography came from, that I assigned to the students to do with their mentors. And really it's just a guide to have a conversation on how to get to know, on getting to know each other. So, you know, the questions, which can go in any direction. It's not like I expect them to turn it back like word for word, but you know, where did you grow up and what was it like? Why did you decide to become a researcher? What do you do when you're not at work? So getting to know mentors and mentees, yeah, as Evan and Dan both said, kind of on a personal level helps that relationship along. Yeah. And other resources to help with setting expectations, you know, coming up with like a communication plan. I sourced from there, and also from the GeoREU Resource Center. So trying to use what has worked at other institutions and in other REUs with us too. Yeah.
I have a question. Firstly, this is an awesome program. I'm really impressed by the outcomes, so it's great. But I was curious, you might have covered this. Do the students select which projects they work on, or are they placed? And is there certain like topics that they're more interested in, or like in general students want to work on more than others?
Right. Okay. Thank you for asking that. No, I didn't cover that. I forgot. You know, ideally we would know maybe all possible projects beforehand and do a full matching process. But what we've done so far, and this year there will be hopefully there will be a little more back and forth, but I have the trainees in their application, they fill out or they select their top 3 general areas of interest within the geosciences. And those are pulled from the JSG Research Themes site. So it's not perfect, you know, but and then so that's what we know from the student side. And they also have a few short answer questions that they answer in the application. So try to get a little bit of their interests in there. And on kind of the potential project side, if you go to that Qualtrics form and fill it out, then there's a place to just describe. It doesn't have to be, you know, anything really in depth, because we also would be happy to help you refine any ideas you have. But there's a space for you to describe the type of project and that you would potentially want a student to work on. And then once we kind of have both of those sides, we'll do some matching, and it seems like there might be a little more interest in making that a little more of a robust process. So maybe we'll start to involve mentors in it. Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome. Any others? I've got a couple things that I wrote down that I wanted to reiterate.
I actually have a question for you about that's maybe too early to be thinking about, but by August, I sure hope things are normal-ish.
Yeah.
Has there been any thoughts on like a potential optional in-person field experience or gathering, really nice. Or I don't know.
Yeah, that would be really nice. I'm trying to think if there's a way we could do it basically before, in the fall, so that students could also then still have time to get their applications in or things like that. I like that idea a lot. And I know that the students from summer 2020 would probably be very angry at me if like they weren't invited too, because they really, really wanted to have a gathering. So that's something we should start looking to. Yeah. See what we could maybe do in the fall. At the very least, maybe we could do something like bring them, if the fall is too early, maybe we could bring them in for the JSG symposium in the spring. which would be nice. Yeah. But thanks for asking that. Well, a couple things that I want to say are that Tim mentioned that we have funds available to help students with software and hardware needs too. So they all get a UTIG when they're in the program. So they have access to all libraries and software that UT students do. So if that's something you're thinking they will need, they'll have access to that. And then, oh yeah, damn. And then hardware, we have a budget for laptops for students. So there was a student who had a Chromebook, and Chromebook doesn't run Google Earth, which is sort of confusing. So we were able to get a laptop to her though that would run Google Earth. She was really patient and appreciative with that. And I don't think I said this.
Chromebooks don't run Google Earth? You gotta be joking me.
I know. I was like, wait, you mean the Google machine doesn't run its own software?
So insane. Yeah, it's not good.
I know. Yeah, I was very confused when we learned that. But these students are fully funded by the RTX. So they're funded by our program, at least for the next 3 this summer and 2 more years. We'll be looking for funding to continue this program beyond that, because I think it's something that really benefits the school. But the benefits for you are, we are asking mentors and instructors to volunteer their time, but you can know that the student that you're working with is fully supported by us, and we follow NSF guidelines for the stipend that they receive. And there is also money to help them or to support them to go to conferences if they kind of request it. It's not a guarantee, it's not a given, but they just have to basically apply for it. And so Jada and Cheyenne both did that last year and presented at GSA. Yeah. I think that's all I wanted to cover. Unless there are any last questions, I think we can have Naoma and Aaron close it off for us. Anyone interested in participating this summer? You can give me like a thumbs up reaction. Yay! Oh, that's great.
Nice to hear about why there were undergraduates in our research group meetings over the summer.
Yeah, they just showed up, popped up in Zoom.
Maybe I missed this, but one last question was, what's like the size of the program? About approximately how many students are there?
We had 23 last summer, which is what we're aiming for, that, or actually maybe a few more, but 12 of them were in projects. We're doing research projects last summer. So 12 to, if we can accommodate more than that, like maybe 17, that'd be great. If it's, if this had been designed to be in person initially, and so when we go back to having at least an in-person option, there would be fewer students when it's in person, but that's also something nice that about it having been remote, is we were able to have more students participate in this than if we would have been, doing housing and dining. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So we're looking for at least like 12 mentors.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for sharing this week. This is really a cool discussion hour, I think.
Thanks. Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you to Tim and Evan and Dan and Michelle and Gail.
Thanks you, Dana.
Awesome. See y'all next week.